It is clearly evident that Jay Hill has had a major impact on the BYU football program, but is that impact and unpredictability reaching even further than we thought? Well, Frank Reich thinks so.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we're talking about some of the comments that Stanford head coach Frank Reich had to say about BYU, and particularly what he makes of BYU's defense that screamed to me that Jay Hill is worth even more than we already thought he was for the Cougars. Then we're going to talk about BYU and Oregon State. They moved a game from 2028. It was reported to be canceled, but apparently it's just moving venues. We'll talk about them heading to Sin City, and then we'll finish up today's show talking about polls. Yes, everybody loves polls, but do they really matter? We're talking about all that ahead on today's podcast, and it's all brought to you today by our friends over at Monarch Money. Go to monarchmoney.com, take control of your finances today, and save 50% off your first year by using the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com. All right. Right at the outset of today's podcast, I want to talk about some of the comments that Stanford head coach Frank Reich had to say to the media earlier this week. Now, any of you who don't know who Frank Reich is, he is considered to be one of the GOAT backup quarterbacks in NFL history. I know that sounds like a crazy moniker to say, but he was a career backup for the most part, 14 years in the NFL, was part of some really crazy games. I think he had the biggest comeback in NFL history at one point. And he also has a pretty good run as a head coach in the NFL as well with the Indianapolis Colts. His time with the Carolina Panthers, okay, the Panthers are woebegone to begin with, so we'll let that slide. But now he is working with Andrew Luck on a one-year basis at Stanford. And if there's one thing I respect about Frank Reich is he's got a very keen offensive mind because he's been an offensive coordinator. He's been an offensive-minded head coach at the NFL level, and he knows good football when he sees it. And that's what brings us to what I wanted to talk about when it comes to Jay Hill and the impact that Jay Hill has had on BYU. I don't think it takes me or anybody out there to say that Jay Hill's impact on the BYU football program has been immeasurable in so many different ways. He has stabilized a program that felt like it was, it was tilting a little bit at the tail end of the run that Elisa Tuihaki had as BYU's defensive coordinator. Jay Hill came in, he installed structure, he installed a very clear identity for his defense, and all he has done now in his third season at the helm of BYU's defense and also as the associate head coach of the football program is be the guy, the right-hand man in many respects that Kalani Sitake has long needed. Who knows how long Jay Hill's going to be in Provo, Utah, because I think you believe that eventually he's likely going to get opportunities to coach his own program at the Power 4 football level, especially considering the success he's had so far. But the biggest thing is BYU needs to take advantage of everything he can offer to them right now, and that is an impactful and, more importantly, an unpredictable defense. Now, Frank Reich spoke to the media earlier this week and was talking about BYU's defense. He said this: they have a very good front seven. They're tough up front. They're going to play an odd front. They're going to play some even front. They do it all, and they use their guys well. They mix up what they're doing. And then he continued. Teams that are complex and have complex blitzes, a lot of times you don't see those blitzes until third down in the NFL because everybody wants to play sound stuff on first and second down. But BYU, they'll pressure on first and second down with stuff you might not typically see until third down, so it presents a unique challenge like that, unquote. I love that. I love the fact that a guy, as I mentioned, who has been working in the NFL for decades, both as a player and a coach, he sees the unpredictability of Jay Hill and this BYU defense, and he sees it as a strength for BYU and a weakness in many respects for his program at Stanford. They try to combat it. Any of you who have watched Jay Hill operate this BYU defense know that he is going to throw everything he possibly can at an opponent. And he talked about it yesterday. He said that, hey, we like to be able to blitz from all angles and bring pressure from everywhere and make it so teams don't know where it's coming from. And the crazy thing about it, you have to just look back at the last 2 games BYU has played as a football program. Portland State this past Saturday, and then going all the way back to December when BYU played Colorado. More often than not, the crazy thing is BYU gets more pressure with what they call simulated pressures than they do with all-out blitzes or blitzes of many varieties. And what is a simulated pressure? Well, you make the team think you're going to blitz. You walk 4, 5, 6 guys up to the line of scrimmage. They all stand there menacingly at the snap, and then all of a sudden they back off, and you've only got a 4-man rush, but it comes from a different angle or a different side of the line than you anticipated it. That's essentially what a simulated rush is. It's still a 4 or a 3-man rush, but you make the offense and the quarterback in particular think you're bringing 4 or 5 or 6 people without really having to do that. That is one of the master strokes that Jay Hill's implemented as BYU's defensive coordinator. Teams don't know where it's going to come from. Raider Demooney last week nearly got a sack. Did he get a sack? I don't remember, but it was a simulated pressure where he was walked up to the line of scrimmage. There were other linebackers up there, and then at the snap, the pressure came, I think it was from the left side of the offensive line side of things, and Raider Demooney broke through as the offensive line took the defensive lineman. He had a wide open lane to the quarterback, and that's exactly what Jay Hill has implemented here at BYU's defense. It is going to be a signature thing for BYU, or signature, I guess, identity for BYU is that unpredictability. I love the fact that Frank Reich is terrified of them bringing a blitz on first or second down or doing something crazy that is going to be unorthodox or out of the norms. That is how you stay ahead of the game. You make it so people can't pick up on what you're going to do. Now, is everything that Jay Hill's going to throw at Stanford on tape at this point? Probably, because he's been the defensive coordinator at BYU for 2 full seasons now. There is not really many pressures or looks that he can give to Stanford that they won't see in their preparation watching tape on BYU. But the wild card in all of it, wild card, you know, that famous phrase, is that Jay Hill, he can mix up when he brings those looks, brings those blitzes, the simulated pressures and the like. And that you can't account for if you're Frank Reich and the Stanford Cardinal offensive mindset. I really, really love what Jay Hill has meant to BYU, and I hope he's at BYU for many years to come. But the nice part is his impact, his legacy, his his notoriety, if you want to call it that, with opposing teams is exactly what I think BYU should want it to be. And that is, they don't know what to do with him. And that's a good thing to have as your calling card in many respects. All right, coming up next, BYU and Oregon State once upon a time played a game in Sin City in Las Vegas that, let's just put it this way, the weather gods, they were not cooperating that night, but BYU made quick work of the Beavers, not the Ducks. They played the Ducks there as well. But are they running it back in 2028 in Las Vegas, this time in a new venue? Sure looks that way, and I think it's the perfect way to go about scheduling this type of a game. I'll explain more next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time they drive, and that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. Mazda offers more than safety. It's won 2025 IIHS Top Safety Plus Pick Awards more than anybody else as of August 2025. And as an athlete focuses on every detail, Mazda does the exact same, from metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather. It's the small details that make the big plays, and just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Check it out today. Go to Mazda, move, and be moved. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys with the NFL season nearly here. It starts tomorrow night, everybody. And FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. The best part of FanDuel is if it's however you want to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in as the live action unfolds, or literally any other way, and it makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup along the way. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app today by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet and potentially get $300 back in bonus bets, all courtesy, once again, of your friends over at FanDuel. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you so much for all of your support out there. Cannot thank you guys for continuing to be everydayers with us here on the podcast, because as we like to say here, it's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I do want to give a special shout out to Ethan Alvey. Now, Ethan apparently is an everydayer on this podcast and was absolutely floored that a good friend of mine and coworker by the name of Tanner Tripp knew me. So Ethan, here's your shout out I promised you on today's show. And I always appreciate people being as effusive in their praise for the work that I do on this podcast. So Ethan, among many, many others, thank you for your support. And there you go. There's your little shout out that I promised I would get you on today's show. But as always, truthfully, thank you for all the support. Please continue to subscribe, like, rate, and review the show, and share it with your family and friends. All right, good news for BYU on the scheduling front. BYU and Oregon State are going to play a game in Las Vegas. Now, a couple of weeks ago, there was a report from FBschedules.com that BYU and Oregon State had canceled a part of their contract. Now, they had a home-and-home series set up for the 2027 and 2028 football seasons. Now, that contract stipulated that BYU would host Oregon State in 2027 in Provo. That game remains in force, while the 2028 game, which was scheduled for Corvallis, is going to be canceled. But news yesterday coming from Brett McMurphy of on3.com is that game, as they said earlier on when they canceled this, they were going to schedule a makeup date in Corvallis at some future date. Well, they have made the adjustment because they're going to play in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium in 2028. It's part of a series that Allegiant Stadium is putting on to kick off the college football seasons. The University of Utah is going to play Miami in Las Vegas in 2027. And the nice part about this, as I mentioned, is it's the perfect way to go about scheduling this game because it allows BYU to keep its full allotment of home games. Because as you heard me say, the 2027 game against Oregon State, which was scheduled for LaVell Edwards Stadium, remains in effect, whereas this game, which was scheduled for 2028, was supposed to be played in Corvallis, Oregon. So it is a home game that Oregon State is actually giving up for BYU to go to Las Vegas and play this game. This is a perfect scenario because 2027 is the year that BYU will have the 5 Big 12 home games, and then in 2028, you have the 5 road Big 12 games. So had BYU given up a home game to play in Las Vegas in this circumstance, they would have only had 5, count them 5 home games. That's not going to fly. And quite frankly, I believe that BYU should be pushing to get to as many as 7 or 8 home games, if at all possible. Now, that may be years down the line due to some contracts that are obviously still in effect for BYU. That's why they're playing at East Carolina this year. That's why they played at Wyoming a year ago. They're trying to finish up contracts and agreed upon games from their independent era. But this is the right way to go about playing a team like Oregon State. Now, they're part of the will be the newly revamped Pac-12, when they face off in Las Vegas. And is Oregon State going to be a world beater? TBD. They don't necessarily look like it right now under Trent Bray, their current head coach, and who knows what the future holds for the Beavers. But BYU and Oregon State have a pretty strong history. I think it's 6-5 in terms of their overall history with one another. And this is the type of game that, if I'm being honest, BYU going to Las Vegas to play Oregon State is going to get a whole lot more Cougar fans there than they would have going to Corvallis, Oregon. And I know before I get comments in the YouTube section or whether you email me or reach out via social media, I know there's a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Pacific Northwest who would be more than happy to travel to Corvallis to watch this game. But what does Corvallis and Reser Stadium hold? Is it like 30, maybe 40,000 people? Whereas in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium, you can get up to 69, maybe 70,000 people there. More butts and seats, more opportunities to watch BYU play more readily because, quite frankly, everybody can fly to Las Vegas. They got flights from literally everywhere across the country. And yes, you may not like Las Vegas because of the strip and everything else, but it is a destination city, and it absolutely will attract more eyeballs playing that game in Las Vegas than it ever would being played at Reser Stadium. I know a lot of you are traditionalists. You want to see games played on home campuses and home venues for these programs. But BYU, I have been a long time proponent of them playing in Las Vegas as often as possible. Last time they played was that Notre Dame game. Was that in 2022 as they lost to Notre Dame? Had they had a little more luck at the quarterback position, they very well may have pulled off that upset. But I think that BYU playing in Las Vegas every other year, if not maybe getting a chance to play there every year, I think it'd be a great thing for the Cougars because, like I said, people will sit up and pay attention when you play games at Allegiant Stadium. It's an NFL venue. Players love the fact that they get to play in NFL-style venues like that. And once again, it's simply put, it's Las Vegas. It's the entertainment capital of the world, and it attracts people that may otherwise say, you know what? I'm not going to Corvallis. Oh, they're going to go to Vegas? Yeah, I'm in on that. Maybe you're not. Maybe that's not you, but I think a lot of people, the majority, are more prone to go to Vegas to watch this game because, once again, it's within driving distance along the Wasatch Front. It's 6.5, 7 hours to Vegas versus, is it 12 or 13 to get to Corvallis? I don't necessarily know my road trip times off the top of my head. But I love this. I love the fact that, yes, it is a neutral site game, but it's not costing you a home game. BYU still get their full complement of at least 6 home games in that 2028 season. And according to FB schedules, the only game outside of what this report is, including the game against Oregon State for 2028, is a home date for BYU against Boston College. So if you're wondering, okay, you have to obviously fulfill the deal that the Big 12 has, the mandate that you have to play a Power 4 program. Well, Boston College is just that. This playing a neutral site game against the Beavers, speaking of Oregon State in Las Vegas, it's a happy coincidence. And I love the fact that it's a neutral site, and it's obviously going to get a lot of people interested to go there and kick off the season down there in Las Vegas. So masterstroke in terms of scheduling to guys like Brian Santiago. I think I remember who his scheduling guru is. It Dylan Moody? I don't remember who it is inside the athletic department for years was the scheduling guy behind the madness that BYU did with their independent schedules. Well, this is a recruiting masterstroke, and I got to give mad props to all parties involved with this because that is the way you go about scheduling stuff as a Power 4 program for BYU, and I'm excited for it. I'm very likely if and when this becomes official and when we start off the 28 football season, I'll be in my 10th year of hosting this podcast, and I will say it right now on the record, that should that game hold, they're playing it at Allegiant Stadium, yours truly will be in Las Vegas watching the Beavers and the Cougars play, and I absolutely would love to watch that game play out because who knows what these two teams look like at that point. I think BYU obviously should be in pretty good hands because in theory, that's Ryder Lyons taking over as the starting quarterback for the BYU football program and should be rocking and rolling at that point if all goes well. But really, really a smart scheduling deal for BYU. And once again, I got to give props to guys like Tom Homo for years, by the way, did a really, really fine job with scheduling when it came to independence. But this is next level stuff. This is playing chess when it comes to playing checkers with scheduling, making sure that A, you're not losing a home game. B, you still get a pretty name brand opponent that's a regional opponent like Oregon State, and you get to go play it in an NFL venue. I think it's a win-win-win all the way around. And I'm sure that many more of you, like myself, are very likely to be in Las Vegas when they kick off the 2028 football season, watching BYU take on the Oregon State Beavers. So looking forward to it and hoping that we have a lot of fun when we get to that point in 2028. All right, coming up next, though, we're going to finish up today's show talking about something that I bemoaned a little bit on social media yesterday, and many of you also bemoaned. BYU, despite a 69-0 thrashing of Portland State, did not move up in the AP poll, and then, quite frankly, in a stunning turn of events, dropped in the coaches poll despite that win. Okay, let's try and make heads and tails of that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Now, many of us out there, yours truly included, are trying to be smarter with their money when it feels like sometimes you're wondering, okay, how do I keep track of all this? You probably can't name all the financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's your 401ks, properties, investments, or literally anything else. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. You're putting off organizing your finances. Monarch is for you. It does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally actually feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. That is probably the number one thing as to why I love Monarch Money. Do not let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com using the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not signed up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, what in the heck are you waiting for? Join us today. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU. I've got for you guys every single day. And as far as it comes to your phone in the form of a text message, it's much more intimate than that. And the kicker is it's just $5 a month to be a part of the Insiders Group, and you get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you at the outset before you charge a single penny. So sign up today. Link is in the show notes below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and hope that many, many more of you will be joining us in short order on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, let's talk about BYU and the national polls. Now, there are some of you out there who believe that national polls shouldn't even be in effect until mid-season. Well, quite frankly, the only poll that really matters is the college football playoff poll, and that doesn't come out until early November. So that's like week 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that realm. And that's the rankings that ultimately matter, because those are the ones that actually get you into the postseason. So yesterday, the new polls for week 2 came out, and in the AP poll, BYU remains one spot outside the top 25 as the top vote getter that's not currently ranked. The University of Utah, who was just behind them in the preseason poll by virtue of their demolition of UCLA, leapfrogged the Cougars into 25th place. Now, I saw some people complaining about that, saying, well, BYU demolished Portland State. Well, guess what? UCLA and Portland State, there's a name brand recognition there that absolutely is going to stick with AP voters. The other thing about it is we saw in the coaches poll, which I actually like to refer to as the SID's poll, the sports information director, because quite often these coaches, they're too busy going through their game plans and the like. They essentially tell the sports information director, hey, fill out that top 25, let me look at it, and then send it off. Well, somehow BYU, despite, as I mentioned, thrashing Portland State 69-0, went from 23rd in the preseason coaches poll to dropping to 25th. Here's the deal about polls. They are obviously a talking point, and heck, we're talking about them on this podcast. So guess what? Bravo to you, poll makers. You guys got me talking about BYU and their status in the polls in week 2 of the college football season. I feel silly for even discussing it, but it was something that I bemoaned on social media. So I'm going to lay out exactly why I feel so strongly about it. Here's the deal. Pollsters are interesting because they have inherent biases, and they bring those to the process. All of them are representing different parts of the country when it comes to the AP poll. They're all media members, and they're spread across the country. And the whole thought is that they span all 50 states, and that makes sure there's a representation from every corner of the United States of America when it comes to these pollsters. Well, guess what? They have different philosophies. They have different teams that they like, they don't like. And once again, their bias plays into all of it. I look at it and say, okay, BYU, yeah, should they be ranked? Maybe. But the bigger point is, it's been yet another thing that BYU can use as motivation for them. Okay, Utah beats up on UCLA and leapfrogs us in the polls. All right, well, let's go out and absolutely smash Stanford, and then let's leapfrog them because they're playing Cal Poly. That's the tit for tat that we can have play out here. So I'm not as concerned about BYU missing out on the top 25 in week 2 of the season. Now, if this continues where they continue to kind of be downgraded because of their schedule, because it's not BYU's fault as to who they scheduled. BYU could go out there and schedule 3 top-tier college football programs and get their butts kicked and still not be ranked. Everybody plays FCS games. Everybody plays teams. And when BYU scheduled Stanford, well, BYU hoped that Stanford's going to be a whole lot better than they are. But all you can do is you're beholden to who you have to play and go out there and make a positive impression. I believe sincerely if BYU handles their business against Stanford, beats up on the Cardinal. And by the way, a little tease ahead to tomorrow. We're going to catch up with a member of the Cardinal Sports Report to talk about that game in depth from the Stanford perspective. So stay tuned for that on our Thursday edition of the show. But if you go out there and beat up on the fighting Andrew Lucks, as I like to call them, guess what? There's going to be a hard press for the national pollsters to move BYU up into the national rankings, because inevitably there are going to be people who lose. Now, do I see programs like Florida State jumping from unranked all the way to 14th after they beat Alabama and say, what the heck? Yeah, I look at that and say, what the heck? But once again, the national media has a bias, and those biases go more towards those traditional blue bloods, no matter how bad Florida State was a year ago. Florida State was the dregs of college football. It was just an abjectly poor season, and they started the season off in positive fashion because they dominated Alabama. But to go from unranked to 14th, okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit here. Let's really see what Alabama turns out to be. Let's see what Florida State turns out to be. And just to parlay that into the conversation about BYU, we're still going to learn a lot about BYU in the next 2 to 3 or 4 weeks as they get ready for Big 12 play. Could BYU go out and fall flat on their face against Stanford and have people laughing at them saying, yeah, there's a reason why you weren't ranked? Yeah, that could happen, but our friends at FanDuel have BYU installed as a healthy 18-point favorite at this juncture. So they should, in theory, run rampant against Stanford. And if you're 2-0 and if things go crazy at the back end of that poll, well, very easily next week, BYU's got a number next to their name. I also look at it as just, you know what? BYU thrives on the disrespect card. They did it all last year. And if it's something that they can use and motivation they can internalize and give them that extra fuel, the extra fire to go out there and stick it to everybody who didn't believe in them, go right on ahead. I'm all for that. I love the fact that this BYU team, they don't really care what people think about them. And I say that as a guy who's around this program 3 times a week during the season, multiple times during the preseason. I'm at every practice that BYU has and every availability they have throughout the year. And the one thing I can tell you about this BYU team is, yes, they understand that people may downgrade them on the outside, but that doesn't hurt their feelings at all. They want to go out there. They want to play the best football they possibly can play. And you know what? If it so happens they end up getting ranked as a result of it, great, let's go for it. But they will internalize the disrespect. They'll use it as motivation. It'll be a chip on their shoulder. And I would expect it gives them a little extra juice as they get ready for Stanford this weekend. But hey, you know what? There's a reason why we have polls out there, because once again, they're a talking point. We literally have way too early top 25 polls for college basketball that just came out for BYU, and they're number 6 in the ESPN poll. Well, guess what? Kevin Young, he's got BYU basketball absolutely rocking and rolling. The national media has fallen in love with this BYU basketball team. Well, guess what? That's kind of the flip side of BYU football right now, where BYU basketball, they're carrying major expectations on their shoulders as they enter their upcoming season, whereas BYU football, it's got a little underdog to them. And I can respect both sides of it, because it's essentially one way or the other. There's no really ever true middle ground in any of it. So no matter where you're at, you're always going to have to go out there and prove yourself. And I respect the fact that BYU football, I don't think they're going to let this slide per se, but they're also not going to fret it that much, because it is very, very early on this season. All right, one note before we go on today's show. Tough loss for the BYU women's soccer team in a top 15 matchup. Lost 1-0. And that obviously stings a little bit, losing to the Arkansas Razorbacks on their home turf at South Field. But back and forth match all game long. And you know what? Soccer's a crazy sport, and it's not going to hurt BYU that much, even though they lost their first match of the season. Talking about national polls, BYU had a meteoric rise. They raised as high as they were 11th in the current polls, if I recall correctly. They may dip a little bit, but losing to the number 8 Razorbacks, it's not going to hurt you that much. But a tough loss for Jennifer Rockwood. Now they look to bounce back in their next match. All right. That is going to do it. That's all I got for you guys on this Wednesday edition of the show. As always, thank you for all of your support. Please continue to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Make sure you share it with your family and friends. And also, in another big moment for Locked On college football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present the College Football Kickoff. It is your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation along 2-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Hawley, and of course, Locked On's local experts, a college football preview that only Locked On can do. Catch the College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. And as always, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And come back tomorrow as an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.